So finally, let's look at different types of authoritarian regimes so we understand the context in which democracy exists. I want to talk briefly about electoral authoritarian regimes, and then we'll look at other types and degrees of authoritarianism. This is useful because transitions to democracy are more likely to happen and probably more likely to be readily sustainable if there's been some context of elections and competing political parties, even in the absence of democracy per se. So electoral authoritarian has contested elections, elected government, some opposition in parliament, but elections are not free and fair, and there either is a ruling party that's hegemonic and controls the electoral machinery, rigs elections, disallows some competition, or you have, as in Iran with the supreme leader, an unelected source of authority that's supreme in nature, like the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, or the king of Morocco, or the military previously in some Latin American states, or even in perhaps Pakistan today. In a competitive authoritarian regime, you really have electoral competition, and it's vigorous, but there's not a level playing field. Again, the government probably controls the electoral machinery. As in Venezuela, it has vastly unequal access to the mass media and the resources of government. So the level playing field is not there. And we see examples of this in Malaysia historically with the dominance of the Barisan Nasional coalition dominated by the United Malay National Organization, UMNO. A competitive system, but not an electoral democracy. Uganda with Yoweri Museveni's national resistance movement, competitive elections, lots of opposition in parliament, not a democracy. In Tanzania, the ruling party, the CCM, long dominate, moving toward democracy. Many question whether it's crossed the threshold yet, despite some presence of opposition in parliament and very contested elections. We've seen countries have democracy and fall back to competitive authoritarianism because elections cease to be free and fair, as in Venezuela in the early 2000s, Nigeria around the same time, Kenya as a result of electoral fraud in the 2007 election, and historically cases of this in countries like Georgia, Nicaragua, and Sri Lanka. Or a country can rise up from military rule and get electoral competition, but not yet cross the threshold to electoral democracy. Pakistan still seems to lag in that regard. There may be elections, but much less competitive, where there is a hegemony by the ruling party that's more domineering and more controlling of every crevice of power and influence, with virtually no pluralism in the mass media. Historically, the ruling People's Action Party in Singapore has won over 95% of the seats in parliament, with 65% of the vote in the contested races. This is now beginning to change as Singapore becomes more competitive. And we see other instances here on this slide of political systems that have had some degree of competition, but really it being largely a facade beneath which a ruling party is massively domineering over the opposition and over society. Of course, this has changed in Tunisia as a result of the Arab Spring and the breakthrough to a genuinely competitive system. And we'll see when we study transitions for democracy other instances where electoral authoritarian regimes may experience, as a result of a convergence of factors, some breakthroughs to greater competition. Now, we can have other authoritarian regimes that are simply not competitive. One-party regimes like the former communist countries, China, Vietnam, still communist, Cuba, still communist, where, the existence of other parties, if they exist, is a total fraud. There are no competitive elections for power. And a political opposition is legally suppressed. You can't organize an opposition party without essentially inviting imprisonment. We have personal dictatorships like Gaddafi's, which fell in Libya, Assad's, which is under challenge in a tragic civil war in Syria, the decrepit and corrupt personal dictatorship of Karimov in Uzbekistan, the oil-based dictatorship of Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan. These vary in their degree of repressiveness and in their degree of domination. They are often hereditary in nature, with the ruler seeking to pass on his power to his son or daughter or whatever it might be, as indeed Assad in Syria essentially inherited the presidency from his late father, Hafez al-Assad. And of course, we have formal absolute monarchies, which still prevail in many countries in the Middle East in particular. Monarchies that are not absolute, but are hereditary and still dominate. So in Morocco, in Jordan, in Kuwait, and Bahrain, there may be an elected parliament, may have some power, but the power still lies with the monarchy in the palace. Less so in Morocco than perhaps in some other monarchies, but still not a democracy. And of course, in Bahrain, we have the tragic instance of a popular swelling of aspirations for a transition to constitutional monarchy, and then the brutal military suppression of these aspirations during the failure of popular mobilization and the crushing of the Arab Spring demonstrations. And of course, we can still have military rule. It's largely gone in the formal sense, but it still exists de facto when a military ruler converts his power, into some kind of civilian facade, as with Omar Bashir in Sudan, Yahya Jammeh in Gambia. There are other instances of this. Totalitarian rule, in which you have a ruling party that suffuses all aspects of political and social life, in which there's not only no political opposition, but no independent media, no independent organization, and a positive requirement for effusive demonstrations of loyalty to the ruling party and deference to, and even almost religious devotion to the leader and the ruling party. This is largely gone in the world now. Totalitarianism has largely died, and this is why North Korea remains as an extraordinary anomaly in the world, the last instance of totalitarianism and its brutal expression in concentration camps, one that certainly will not survive very much longer. These then are the different types of regimes we see in the world, both democratic and authoritarian.